You are now listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm joined by Judith Corvin-Blackburn. She is a transpersonal psychotherapist, teacher, shamanic minister, and co-founder of the Shamanic Multidimensional Mystery School. She is the author of several books, including Activating Your 5D Frequency, and for more than 50 years, she has been dedicated to inspiring people to step into joy, purpose, and inner authority. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Astral. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. I've been anticipating this conversation, and I know our audience is going to just adore you and your work. So thank you for taking the time to come on the show today.
Sure.
So, for those who don't know you, could you share just a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you do?
Sure. Um, uh, Besides writing, which is obviously uh, a great joy for me, and something I've always done, although I always thought I'd write fiction when I was younger. When I was in college, I was writing novels, not this kind of these kinds of books. And I'm a transpersonal psychotherapist. And what that means is that I work with people on a soul level to move through the programming and really the dysfunction we've taken in from our culture. But it's also patterns that we usually bring in on a soul level as well to heal. And in doing that, of course, I had to work on myself, which was a good thing. Um, and I've learned a lot about the human psyche and how we operate essentially. So that's very much woven into my writing. Um, I've been doing this for, I'm going to be 80, so a really long time, since my mid 20s. And in my late 20s, I had a spiritual awakening. And that awakening has informed me ever since and really shifted my whole life.
Beautiful. Um, so the book that you just released, the Ascension Journey, could you explain for us a little bit, like what is an Ascension Journey? Like how would you define that, for others?
Well, we're in an evolutionary process. And from my perspective, what that means is we are reclaiming who we really are designed to be. And we have 12 strands of DNA, which most people know. Um, and we were told, at least when I was educated, that only two of them mattered. The other 10 were junk DNA, which is quite amusing from one angle, right? How can you have 10 strands of DNA that serve no purpose? We were designed to use all 12. The and we used to. Okay, we're really fifth and sixth dimensional beings that got shut down and have been operating on third and fourth dimensions for millenniums, 10, 13,000 years. And now's the time to shift that and reclaim who we are. And that's what the Ascension Journey is.
Hmm.
It's um, moving beyond density, moving beyond separation consciousness, reopening really our hearts and accessing compassion in a much larger way, um, and understanding unity consciousness that we are connected to everything.
Hmm.
So those are primarily characteristics of the fifth dimension. And my book before this current one was Activating Your 5D Frequency. I decided to write something on the sixth dimension because I feel like this is where we create our reality from. And actually, Plato knew this. I found this so fascinating as I was, as well, in my own development, opening more and more. I took Philosophy 101 in 1964 from, I still remember how boring this teacher was. And he talked about the world of forms. And I had no idea what that meant. And I don't think he did. But years later, it hit me. And this was before I had read Barbara's book. It was before she wrote the book, the Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. Um, but I just had this flash of insight one evening that, oh, I got what he meant by the world of forms, and that it is actually the scientists call it the quantum field. Native um, elders call it the field of plenty. Everything that we see manifest, every thought we can have, every quality exists in an energy form in the sixth dimension. And it's all there. And there's an interactive process between 6D and 3D. In other words, in 3D, it gets into physical manifestation. So if I hold the idea and the ideal that we will have an earth filled with peace and harmony and justice, and everybody gets to thrive, and all the animals and the land thrives, right? And enough others hold that same idea. It's sort of like hits on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It gets empowered, and at some point it begins to show up. If conversely, we hold a war is inevitable, which has been a cultural belief, we have what we have now. So, in this evolutionary process, we're learning that we're always creating, but so much of what we've created is unconscious. So, when things are not working well in our lives, we have created that not because we're bad, but because these are lessons and challenges that our soul has chosen to bring in, one possibility, or we were brought up with a set of beliefs and didn't know how to bring in anything else. So as we go through this ascension journey more and more, we will be able to own, okay, I've created this part and I love it, and I've created this part and I don't love it. How can I recreate this differently? And that's where we use our connection with the sixth dimension.
Mm.
That's one of the things. And then the other, which I'm really excited about, is sacred geometry and sacred architecture. It's utilizing the cosmic patterns that show up in all manifestation in our own cells to connect with cosmic consciousness.
I had so many cool questions popping up as you were talking, so I'm going to try to
I run
bring
into
them into form.
that.
But the first one that popped in my head was the process where we had all 12 strands of DNA activated at one point, and now we're down to two. Is there any kind of theory or understanding, like what happened in between then and now that caused us to have that disconnection?
Yes, and actually, Barbara Hand Clow has written a book. It has a different name now, but it was initially called Catastrophobia.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't read it, but I know what it's about. So my details may not be correct, but uh, her assumption is that there was a global trauma
Mm-hmm.
that threw us into fear and deactivation, so to speak. And that coincides, and I don't know whether she talks about this in the book, but it appears that Atlantis fell for the last time around 13,000 years ago. Um, and that was from what we know, it was a huge tsunami, earthquake. It scattered people, it took people by surprise. And while I think, well, as legend goes, and legend probably has truth to it, Thoth came from Atlantis to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Emerald Tablets. and taught the Egyptians a lot of what the Atlanteans knew. I also think the Egyptians had to be also operating. I don't know whether it's 12 out of all 12 strands. I don't know that the Atlanteans were even at different, that society, from what we know, went through different um, highs and lows, but they were
Mhm.
certainly operating a lot higher than we are.
Right.
So they were, I believe they were at least operating on fifth dimension and activating sixth dimension. I see 5D and 6D together, just
Right.
like I see 3D and 4D.
Hmm.
So where 5D is kind of the more physical manifestation of how we live and who we are, and 6D is the emotional, spiritual, energetic body that feeds it,
Hmm.
feeds our fifth dimension. So it appears that in that trauma, that was the beginning of a dimensional descent. Now, Egypt, very ancient Egypt, I'm not talking about the pharaohs. By the time the pharaohs came in, there was already a dimensional descent. And I saw this when I was in Egypt. I was there in the end of 2005. And you could see the differences in the hieroglyphs, for instance. The ancient hieroglyphs were really simple. And of course, our Western mind goes, oh, well, they were simple because they weren't evolved. But in fact, it was the opposite. They were simple because they were able to communicate with frequency.
Hmm.
So it wasn't the design, it was the frequency. And as the society degenerated some, which meant DNA strands closing down on another level, it became much more complex. The hieroglyphs were much more complex. Anyway, there was just a really strong awareness on my part that that was what was going on.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen the catastrophe in many people's records. It's crazy how common it is for people to have this sort of inherent trauma. And as soon as they open and ask the right question, it's like, oh, there it is. And I mean, it's like 50% of the people I read for, something about that comes up, or they'll bring it up. And so I can definitely see how that would shut people down because it's just, I think many of us that are incarnated right now
Yeah.
have a connection there, and we're somehow supposed to either light up that DNA and get back online with that, or we're supposed to do some kind of healing work around, I don't know, maybe what caused some of that trauma initially. But I love learning about Atlantis, and I love reading all these other people's records to get these different people's perspectives on like where they were when that happened. And it starts to tell this greater story, and it's you definitely see it in all the mythologies, but they word it differently and they use different language. But I do feel like it was such a collective experience that we're all tapped into it somehow, whether it's collective unconscious or something. So that
Yeah,
definitely makes
absolutely.
sense.
And the field of epigenetics now shows how this all gets handed down
Mm,
genetically. Really, it's in our genes, even
right.
if it's multiple generations back, and we can heal it. I like the way you said that of we're bringing our DNA back online.
Hmm.
And in many ways, it's happening without, I don't know that people even have to know it. It's beginning to happen. We're getting bombarded by photons, and both from the sun and the central sun that feeds our sun, and also from the inside of the earth, which has absorbed that information.
Hmm.
So we're opening anyway and reclaiming balance, because I think what happened in the trauma is that little by little, more and more, we got thrown out of balance. And, I'm sure you've heard a lot of talk, and it sounds like I didn't realize you read the records of, the sacred feminine is coming back in. But
Hmm.
essentially, the goddess got kicked out. So we had a huge imbalance. That's why patriarchy was able to take hold, which didn't serve anybody. It didn't serve men it really any more than women. They might have had a better outer experience, but we disconnected males from their inner experience.
Mhm. So in your book, do you talk about maybe like practices or ways that people can actively work with, this kind of bringing that DNA back online? Are there practices that you suggest or?
Well, each chapter has a meditation at the end. And when I talk specifically about trauma DNA, there's actually a specific meditation for that. Um, and the classes I teach, I also have people through meditation go into their cells. And one of them is to deactivate the trauma, but then another meditation is to activate more of the star DNA, which is the dormant DNA that we're reclaiming. Throughout the book, I also have journal questions to help people. The the piece that there are maybe two or so ongoing themes in terms of practice. Of course, it always sort of bottom line, it's observing ourselves in as loving a way as we can, which means noticing judgment, patting it on its head, sending it on its way until the next one wants to walk in. Um, to be able to observe our shadow self, because we all have a shadow, and be able to send it love and begin to integrate it into ourselves. This all helps to open our hearts, but also to heal emotional wounds, because that distorts our energy. We're not able, it's like that needs to get cleared as much as possible. Again, we're not perfect. We're not going to be perfect. We can be 5D, 60. We're still not going to be perfect because we're still going to be in human form. Um, but to do this enough that it stops standing in our way.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's specific enough for you. If you want to ask me more specifics, I'll do my best.
No, that's good. Um, so when I was reading over some of your work, you talk a little bit about the Ka body. Um, and then as you were talking about Egypt and Thoth and the Emerald Tablets, my brain was like, Merkaba, is the Ka body somehow connected
You,
to what Thoth is talking about in the Emerald Tablets? And could you explain for those who have never heard of the Ka body, like what that is? How can we work with it?
well, what I see and there's different interpretations, but one interpretation which resonates for me, the Ka is our idealized energetic blueprint.
Mm,
I literally get an image of it in the sixth dimension in geometric form.
hmm
So you're in there, I'm in there, everybody on the planet is in there. And we all have different geometric forms, probably just slight differences that we have to be more and more attuned in order to understand it. But the Ka holds all our potential. And I also think that the Ka is this is actually a new thought, so I'll try this out. The Ka body is actually ongoing in communication with beings of higher consciousness.
mm,
So there's probably always some change and new data coming in. As we go through this ascension process, we reconnect more and more with our Ka. When
mm,
we go through feeling really grounded and expansive and joyful, really, our Ka is in. Okay? When we're confused and stumbling through our lives, which is, it's pretty crazy out there. So sometimes it's hard not to. We're disconnected from that part of ourselves. So practicing bringing it in more and more. And of course, meditation is one really beautiful way to do it. And as you were talking about practical kinds of things that I put in there, as we understand sacred geometry more, we can utilize it. It holds an energetic, harmonious frequency so that we can surround ourselves through our buildings, through just creating beauty,
Mhm.
around us, getting out in the natural world, um, to support our reconnection.
Mhm.
Sacred sites and creating your own. So,
Yeah. So every time you speak, it's like I get all these downloads. But
but
when we were talking about the call, I was thinking about I did an episode on the seven bodies, and there's this sort of split with the lower and higher manas. And when you go to the higher mind, then it's like you remember, things from your other lives, and you're more connected to your higher self and like the Buddhic and Atmic planes. But I feel like maybe the Ka is sort of that in between of kind of opening that so that that information becomes more accessible. And maybe it is the sacred geometry that when we're brought into like harmony and balance within ourselves, then that information becomes easier to translate because it matches our own frequency. Um, and then I was thinking, I'm a homeopath and I also work with flower essences a lot. And I think about like the way that water, if you like put a thought in water or you put an essence in water, it has this, there is a shape or structure to it, although we can't see it unless we, have the technology. But there are like sacred geometrical patterns, even when we work with essences that are forming in the water. And that too, whether we go out in nature or we work with the essences themselves, like brings us, I think, into maybe more of a balance as far as our energy field to start to resonate with more harmony instead of having these like distortions. Um, so I,
absolutely. I mean, we have to clear a lot of beliefs and fears that get
Mhm.
in the way of that.
Mhm.
But yes, I love the way you put that, Astral.
Yeah, my my imagination is just going crazy as you're talking. It's really fun. I love speaking with people like you because it's really inspiring. So when we talk about, the 90 vertical axis, is the way that you see that similar to how Barber kind of describes it
Oh,
in alchemy?
absolutely. Really, my multidimensional work, 90% her work was the foundation for it.
Hmm.
Um, Especially Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. Many, many decades ago, I had read the Pleiadian Agenda, which
Hmm.
I can't remember. And Barbara and I correspond occasionally, and I don't know, she said, she just channeled it. So even she
Right.
doesn't have a lot of the linear pieces of it, right? Um, but alchemy was very focused,
Hmm.
and it was hugely influential in my work.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love how she pulled a lot of the science together because I think many of us intuitively know these things. I was reading her book and she had this image of like a white hole. And I
Oh,
had this
white.
meditation one time and I was connected to the elemental realm and they were like, it's kind of like a white hole or so. And I was like showing the sun as like, and that was the word that came through was a white hole. And I had no idea what that meant. And then I'm reading Barbara's book and she's like, here's the science of like what that concept would look like. And I was so appreciative because I think many of us know it, but we don't have the language. And then we go out and try to like explain it, and it's just like hitting a wall because it just sounds like we're making it all up. But I do think she kind of helps bridge the intuitive knowledge with this logical information, and how the science. Now we have all this cool science, so
Right. Oh,
it's
yeah.
there.
It really grounds it. And
Yeah.
as you say, people are getting this intuitively, but if they don't have a context, it's
Hmm.
harder both to hold on to it and also to communicate it. So to understand how it's getting backed up by science, really, it's the wisdom comes through the intuitive.
Hmm.
The science really grounds it and helps us go, oh yeah, this isn't crazy.
Right. Right. And I feel like somehow, even though it's traumatic. Like we lost our information, everybody got all messed up, and the ego became like more abundant than the intuition and all this. But I feel like it seems all fragmented and discombobulated, but I do have this feeling that it was supposed to happen in a certain order. And like we're now reintegrating it all. But it was such a bumpy journey to get to where we are. But it feels like such a potent time to be alive right now. And I think we take it for granted. Like that all this information is accessible and we can study, all of these different cultures and really bring a lot and integrate it. I mean, how amazing, because our ancestors, they might have just got like this little piece or they might have had the intuition about it, but how could they prove it? And now it's just beautiful, the interconnection. I do see that like within the collective unconscious, like us all being more interconnected as a species now because of things like the internet, which is also could be distorting at the same time. It's like this, light and dark aspect, but I do think the journey is somehow there is an order to it, even though it doesn't seem that way.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. And, um, I think it's been backed up by many things.
Mhm.
A friend of mine many years ago did a channeling about the internet that it was, and I really think this has held out. It's a stepping stone for
Mhm.
us to be able to do this all telepathically like we used to be able to.
Right.
So I think that the ancients, if you will, really had access to a lot of what we have access now, but in a different way. They didn't need it in a left brain kind of way.
Right.
I also think, though, that this very painful journey, really, for the planet, this was we kicked ourselves out of the garden, so to speak,
Hmm.
and we're trying to get back. Um, is that we're coming that it's going up another octave than it ever was because of going through the pain
Hmm.
and then developing our compassion around it. So it's like an older and wiser compassion
Hmm.
than the innocent compassion of, oh, this is just the way things are.
Right. Right.
So it'll be interesting. I probably, it won't be in this body, but it'll be interesting to see. Really what's going to come through and very exciting. And the more people that hold that image, this is the 6D piece, the more people
Right.
that hold that image, the sooner it's going to
Hmm.
show, the less
Right.
resistance.
Yeah, as you were talking about the sixth dimension and like holding the image and like the realm of forms, I was thinking of the Hermetic principle, like all is mental, somehow corresponding to that. Like it
Oh,
starts
yes,
in
right,
our
right.
mind, like the universe is mental. And but if all of us are holding a similar thought form, and connecting to that, and we're pulling it from the sixth dimension down, we really could manifest so much beauty on earth if we could just all get on the same wavelength.
Absolutely. And actually, when I did most of what I've done in terms of uh, my book, well, really all my books, but especially since 2020, has all been on the internet. But
Mhm.
when the 60 Ascension Journey was released last September, I did a talk at a local bookstore here. And a man who just was kind of wandering through, he was just a tourist in the town, came in. And one of the questions, I think he asked me this question, what percentage will it take to
Mhm.
create that? And 20% popped into my head, and he had just read something that said 20%.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't have to be, it could be 21 and a half, but
Right, right.
right.
So it's not impossible.
The preciseness is not all that important, but it absolutely can happen. And probably because everything's energy, as you know,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And energy it can shift right away.
Right.
So, as we all get on enough of the same page, which
Hmm.
really comes from the heart, uh, the mind following the heart,
Right.
then we can see that beautiful planet that we're all longing for and that we're all holding in our
Hmm.
hearts and have been told, oh, that's absolutely impossible.
Right. Yeah, we have to. restructure our imagination a little bit too. I think we've been taught that imagination is just frivolous and like it's unimportant and but
Well,
I think it's so important that we can be creative with our imagination because that's how we hold the vision, of a better world. So, maybe it seems delusional or something to have that utopian vision, but, I think we have to at least play with the idea of what does a peaceful world look like? What does, harmony on earth look like? What do we look like when we're fully, healthy and connected to our communities? And, it's just, but there's no vision really right now for it. I feel like we go back on the timeline to kind of see when we were more tribal. That's some kind of example for us, to try to get our imagination thinking that way. But
I will tell you though, in both of my books, Activating Your 5D Frequency and the 60 Ascension Journey, I give meditations,
ah,
guided
beautiful.
meditations of that world. Of
Ah,
course, it's just a beginning and it's just, um, but it's really important. And the
mhm.
more and more people that do this, again, the stronger that energy becomes. Um, there's something you said I wanted to, it just kind of flew out when I said that. Oh, about imagination. That's the feminine. I want to say two things. One, it's the feminine. The feminine has been um, devalued under patriarchy, but
Mhm.
you don't really mess with the goddess. The sacred feminine is hugely powerful,
Mhm.
and which is probably why they had to suppress it.
Right.
But, so that is definitely more and more being activated and honored, which is
Mhm.
very important. And when the three primary characteristics of really being 5D, 6D is, unconditional love and compassion for self and others,
Mhm.
unity consciousness, and unbridled creativity.
Mm,
That's how important that is.
right.
It's not frivolous. It really is where wisdom, inspiration, um, innovation, we could go on with how important imagination is.
Right. Yeah. And as an artist, I'm always trying to encourage
Mhm.
people because there are a lot of blocks with people with their
Yes.
creativity. I can't tell you how many times people say, I can't draw a stick figure. I'm like, well, maybe stop trying to draw stick figures and try to draw something else. But it's something about just giving yourself the freedom to explore the creative process. Like there's magic in that, and it doesn't have to look a certain way. But I spend a lot of my time inspiring and encouraging people to make art as I've spent years studying Rudolf Steiner and, raising my children with this sort of Waldorf type perspective. And I can see how, that hasn't been shut down for them. Like they just got to evolve and grow and like honor their creative expression. And then I do get a little sad, like that people are so blocked that they just believe that they're not creative beings. So I feel like most of my work is just helping people remember that if you're here on Earth, you're human. You have creative potential within you. It doesn't matter if you're, cooking or sewing or making mandalas or whatever it is. All of that helps you tap into things like the sixth dimension because you're able to play with those forms and manifest them here, like and bring them down to Earth. And it's so important, and I love that we were talking about it because it seems like it's separate from my other work, but it's just not. The art is a part of all of it.
I'm totally on board with you on this. It's very important. And I think that when people really have their creativity flowing, and as
Mhm.
you say, it doesn't matter what form it takes.
Right.
um, we're opening more DNA strands.
Hmm.
So absolutely. And beauty does that too. There's um, a geometric harmony to beauty that,
Hmm.
oh, the Greeks knew.
Right.
Of course, Plato was Greek. The ancient Greeks were pulling in periodically in the
Hmm.
last 13,000 years. There were cultures that large enough that we still know about them
Right.
that were pulling in these awarenesses.
Right. And when you look at their art and their statues and their architecture, you can see that, and it's crazy how it we were like so advanced, and we do have, some of these civilizations it's hard to prove, it's hard to find. But then you look at the Greeks and you're like, what's there? I can see the Colosseum. I can see that there's so much balance and beauty and structure to every part of this culture. And then it just stops. It's like it gets then we have like the Middle Ages and everything's just I don't know, it's just weird how we lost it, and that's why
Right.
I
And
love
then there'd be
mythology
like
and stuff.
pockets of light. And
Right.
many indigenous cultures never lost. My theory, I have no idea if it's right, but is that many of the indigenous cultures, African, maybe some of the South Asian, which I'm not very familiar with, um, Native American Indians, um, were Lemurian.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't need a lot of external, the way I experienced Lemuria, they didn't need a lot of external structure.
Right.
They knew how to just live harmoniously in a certain vibration, and the earth just worked for them.
Right.
Aborigines would be another one of those cultures. Um, And so I don't think the Lemurians had a lot of structure. They probably had some, and it was aligned with sacred geometry and the ley lines in the earth. But the Atlanteans, which was a more masculine
Mm-hmm.
culture, they had amazing structures.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you combine them, because Lemuria was very feminine, you combine them, you get who knows what we'll create.
Right. And it's both of them, coming together. That's how I kind of see like the Kundalini or like Shiva Shakti. It's both of those cultures. So Lemuria is more grounded through integrating that Atlantean, like both of them are important um, in the scheme. And I think that's what we're kind of doing now is learning how to integrate,
Yeah.
the logic and the intuition, the masculine and the feminine. And, I was regressed. I did a QHHT, my first one, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But I went to Lemuria. But
Ah.
when I saw it, she actually had to ask. She was like, "Are you in Lemuria?" Because the woman that was guiding it had an idea. And I was like, "Well, we don't call it that because we don't use that kind of language." But because it was all telepathic, so it's interesting because it's very six dimensional. It's just like the thought form I was having, I would send to someone else, and they would just know. But it was funny because it's like, well, you can call it that, but we don't call it Lemuria. But I think that's what it was. And when I first walked up, because, they guide you into the visualization, I'm like, oh, it's a crystal city. And then I went to like my little home and she's like, what does it look like? And I'm like, it looks like an amethyst. It looked like I was living inside an
Oh,
amethyst.
wow. Oh, how cool.
But I wasn't the amethyst. I was just like in the amethyst. And it made me wonder about, density in our physical bodies. I don't know if they were the same because how the heck am I in an amethyst? I don't know. But it was a really fun experience for me to go back there and to just have that whatever creative experience there. I mean, it was very different. It's hard to even put words to it. I had to go re-listen to the recording a few times and be like, what was I saying? But I've also had a lot of people in Atlantis come and have their records read, so I don't necessarily have as many memories there, but the contrast is very interesting to me. And the overlap of, I think, at times they were on Earth at the same time. Like there was a point where Atlantis and Lemuria were together. Um, but, even then, I think it was hard to integrate masculine and feminine. I think we're doing that now. I think it's really important now, but it's like very presently lived now.
Yeah, now the ancient Egyptians, and see, I think that the information about the integration was always there. I love your
Hmm.
experience in what no doubt we call Lemuria,
Right.
and who knows what it really is or was
Yep.
called. And as you say, it was just they didn't need names because they knew how to send information easily.
Right.
But if you think about it, as we become less and less dense physically, why not go into an amethyst?
Right. Right. Project your consciousness. You can project it into different dimensions. You could definitely project it into like a crystal, which would be, maybe like the second dimension,
Right.
the mineral
No.
kingdoms. And but it was just wild to me how easily I was able to do it in regression. Like, oh, yep, and I'm in amethyst now. So, but I do think they were more connected to all dimensions simultaneously. So they could go into 1D, they could go into 9D. They were communicating through the 6D, and it all seemed very organic when I was in that space. But then when I try to do it here, it's a little more complicated. I have all these
Yeah.
other thoughts coming in, and I'm like, oh, I have to be done in 30 minutes with this meditation. And there's so much structure to this reality that it's harder, I think, to let yourself get into that flow state, so your consciousness can shift. But um, could you explain a little bit about how 4D plays into the ascension path and connects to the fifth and sixth dimension? Because I think the fourth dimension gets kind of skipped a lot.
It does. And I get asked this a lot. And actually, in activating your 5D frequency, I do have a chapter on navigating the fourth dimension. And Barbara Hanclough does a wonderful job in in many ways in terms of the fourth dimension because she was given this image, which I've put in both of these books, from the Pleiadians of um, of a human lying on what do you call it? Like a massage table or a healing
Right.
table.
Yeah, I know
You
this
know,
image.
and you know what I'm talking
Hmm.
about. Right. Okay, and then above it, that is a canopy,
Hmm.
and the canopy is actually the fourth dimension. From that canopy, you can access the higher dimensions.
Hmm.
Um, However, when we're in trauma or have not been able to work through, when our emotional bodies are all gooked up, which is the case pretty much in our crazy society before people are really working on the emotional clearing, it creates this fog. And you probably read that, you remember that from her
Hmm.
book, that you can't get through.
Right.
So we lose our access fully to those higher dimensions. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't access them at all. You can still be working on an emotional level out of a lot of trauma. And sometimes certain types of trauma can actually open awareness of higher dimensions, but you
Hmm.
can't fully get there in an embodied, sustainable way
Hmm.
without clearing that canopy on a personal level and also on a collective level. Because the more we do it on a personal level, because we're holographic, it will
Hmm.
clear on the collective level as well.
Hmm.
So um, it's just really important. It asks that we clear our emotional body and that we work with our shadow so that those portals open in a fuller, more accessible way.
Hmm.
Um, I talk about being 3D, 4D humans, and what that means is, well, we all know 3D, it's what we're in our bodies, we're popping through our lives. Um, the fourth dimension holds all the archetypes, and it's very emotional dimension. And if if you get hung up on not having clear emotions, so you're still carrying old trauma and anger and fear and all that trauma stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's hard to move through it. And it really informs our 3D lives. This is what all this suffering that's going on. Again, just the more self-aware and the more kind and the more compassionate we can be first to ourselves and
Hmm.
then to all others, because we're all connected, um, the clearer that canopy gets. And the more, again, on an individual level, but also on a collective level, we can access who we're supposed to be, which is 5D, 6D.
Right. as you as you're talking about the canopy, even though I've read that book and I've thought about it, it just kind of came through that the canopy might, in a way, be like this sort of safety mechanism for like keeping us contained from those higher dimensions. Because if there's fear, I always tell people if you're afraid, you're not going to be able to do it. With some of these
Mhm.
tools and these things, if you're like if you're afraid of tarot, you just should work on that before you do tarot. I always tell people because like what
Right.
are you actually afraid of? We don't, but I think it might be kind of protecting us, almost like the way the ego kind of protects the self. It's like this
Mhm.
shell, but then once you let the fears drop, then you can have access to these higher planes. But if you think about someone that's operating in fear, having access to some of the spiritual dimensions, it could come through as psychosis or schizophrenia. I mean, you're channeling all sorts of frequencies, and if you're not grounded, it might not be safe for you. So I never saw it that way until you were talking, and then it was like it's like a
Yeah,
shell.
right. Yeah, that's true. That it is, according to Barbara, diaphanous light when
Mhm.
it's clear.
Right.
So whether it was, uh, uh, but when you compare it to the ego, it becomes the shell, I think, is what
Hmm.
you're really getting. Because much like we think our ego protects us, and it may give us strategies to
Hmm.
manage 3D and 4D. It really holds us back simultaneously.
Right.
So,
Right. Like you can see why it might be there to safeguard, but then it's also preventing you from tapping into a more multidimensional view of yourself in the world, even if it's there for a reason. It's like, I think doing the shadow work and, working with the ego and observing it and understanding it and working through fears and things like that, I do think it makes you more open to it, to connecting to these higher planes. And I do think, like you were saying, like some people are just kind of I think we just go to some of them. It's like we're in a certain state. And I was thinking about, when we're doing yoga, like a lot of people will do yoga, but they're not looking at it spiritually. They're like, oh, I'm stretching, but I'm doing yoga. But
mm,
sometimes I think they start to kind of tap in because they're making these forms out of
yeah,
their body, or they're, in a class that's got all these mandalas everywhere and people are banging gongs and stuff. And even though they're not quite there, I think, they're like, oh, I had this experience in a yoga class. I don't know what that is. But I think when you work through or with the fourth dimension and go there consciously, it's like, I know exactly where I am now because it's so familiar. Um, so it's beautiful to be able to integrate all these dimensions and to know when you're there versus doing it unconsciously.
right. And I do think, like what you were saying with people doing yoga, uh, that we get glimpses as starters,
Right.
right? And then we go, oh, what's that? And it leads us and leads us and leads us. But
Mhm.
we do have to clear the emotional body
Right.
enough to keep it, to hold it more consistently. And
Hmm.
even then, one of the things I hear over and over again and speak into a lot is we're still in the beginner stage. We're not going to be
Hmm.
able to hold it consistently, and people think they're doing something wrong, or um, uh, if they flip back into a lower frequency, versus that being how we grow.
Hmm.
So,
Right. So I'm looking over some of my questions and I'm curious if you can explore a little bit about the star seed connection to some of these different dimensions as well for us, because I think it's hard for some people to understand star seeds. It sounds a little imaginative for people, but I do think there's
I love that way to say it.
a
That's
very
great.
logical aspect to it. So it's cool to ground it a little bit and have a conversation about that if you could.
Yeah, actually, I teach a starseed class called Embracing Your Starseed Nature. But
Hmm.
until probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I never used that term.
Hmm.
And so as I stepped into it, I think it's a really important term. The way I see starseeds are souls that have actually originated in advanced star civilization,
Hmm.
that have been incarnated sometimes many, many times on the planet, maybe some fairly new, but that have um, soul mission this time around to really help with this transition, because
Mhm.
this is not just an individual journey, as we've been talking about. It is a collective journey. We really are here to change the planet.
Mhm.
And these advanced star civilizations, they're not perfect either, but many of them are operating out of very loving, conscious, and awareness where everybody's thriving.
Mhm.
And so, on a cellular level, we have memories, even if we haven't activated them yet, for star seeds of what it's like. And
Mhm.
so we know it's possible. Because if um, now all humans have some star DNA as far as we know. So it's not just like star seeds are special, but I do think that people that identify as star seeds um, have perhaps more ability to remember
Mhm.
and therefore to put that remembering into, to give it a lot of energy from the sixth dimension so that it can show up here.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the questions I was asked recently um, is, how do you know if you're a star seed? And the answer that came through, which I really think is accurate, is if you're asking the question, you're a star seed.
Mhm.
It's as simple as that. So if you're drawn to it, if you think it's, if it activates something inside of you. So,
Yeah, I like that. I have had a lot of people in the records ask about their starseed lineage. I don't think anyone who's ever asked hasn't been sent somewhere. And it's interesting because they're all, I mean, there's so many, and there's some things that I don't even think about. I haven't even heard about it. Like I had somebody that was like connected to the Hydra constellation, and I was like, that's a new one.
and they're
And
all coming in. Yes, there's a bunch of them, more
right,
and more
new
and more.
or right, people think, oh, Pleiadians. I think there's something about the Pleiadians that's very accessible for us. I don't know. I think it might be the fifth dimension connection to them. But I started working with Pleiadian energy when I was like 4 or 5 years old. That's when I was like, it's so like it feels angelic, it's very comfortable, but it just keeps going and going. I learn new stuff all the time, and I'm like, it's not just Pleiadians and Arcturians. It's like there's such a huge universe, and I do think people incarnate and bring these frequencies here to Earth. It's like little samples. It is like a seed, and I love the word starseed, even though like everything, I feel like in our world it gets, it's just like overused and people, make it sometimes something it's not. But it is like being a seed planted here and like bringing these frequencies from
Yeah,
other places to Earth. And what a beautiful gift, to help shift Earth out of just thinking just three-dimensionally, and
absolutely. And it's like this beautiful tapestry,
yes.
with all these different, you want to talk about diversity, that's real diversity. Working
Right.
together, which is what we all need to be doing. But
Yes.
um, so, yes, I hadn't thought about the seed in the way you said it, though. Astro, I love that. That's really what feels right to me. And
Mhm.
again, this is a collective journey, and um, yes, make your life better. And it's an inside job. We got to do our own healing,
Mhm.
but we're doing it for a larger vision, which is the
Right.
collective. And one of the awarenesses I've had is there's a, a very special temple on Alcyon, which is one of part of the Pleiades. And there's a university. I love that name
Mhm.
because it's a university. And
Right.
I think the temples in ancient Egypt actually, and probably Atlantis,
Hmm.
were the prototypes came from this Pleiadian temple,
Hmm.
but I've been told that I teach there. And so in my meditation, I'll go there and kind of check it out. And as I was sort of focused on that, I got this because people from all different star systems show up. I mean, or
Right.
beings. It's not just
Hmm.
Pleiadians, it's from everywhere. I thought, well, how do they communicate with each other? How do I teach a class right?
Right.
With people from all these different star systems. And I got this image of this hologram that a thought produces a multidimensional hologram
Mm.
that transmits the information. And that's how we communicate with each other. So, we're just beginning again to expand and understand these things. We're so caught up like we have to have language. Well, maybe not, as you got experienced in that place that we call Lemuria.
Right, right. Oh yeah, that was so fun. I love that version of me. And I was very aware in Lemuria about simultaneous time, which is something I didn't understand. When I was there, I was like, I think I'm there right now. But like I was looking at it, but I was like, but I'm like touching things, and I'm like, I actually am in Lemuria. But it's like if anything has ever existed, it's somehow still there. And I think that's also how can you teach somewhere so that's not here? And it's like because there's a point where time starts to I say get wibbly wobbly because I love Doctor Who. But as we end, I would like you to talk a little bit about our relationship with time and like how does that change and evolve, as we expand into these, I guess more ascended versions of ourselves.
Yeah, that's a big question, and it's a really important one. And I can give a snippet.
Mhm.
Um, where there are plenty of others that can give other snippets, and we might
Yes.
have a big picture here. But what we know, even in the fourth dimension, is when you go into the higher dimensions, all time occurs simultaneously. So
Hmm.
that's where the idea of past, present, and future become irrelevant.
Right.
However, in our bodies and in some sort of linear life, we have linear time, so it begins. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you see that in nature. Something's born, it goes through its cycle, and it moves on. And it helps us organize, I guess. I remember
Mhm.
though, I was in Morocco in the 70s. And we found out when we were traveling there that, as an example, it might have changed by now, but when somebody invites you for dinner on Wednesday, all they mean is Wednesday or Thursday. You could come anytime. So they were really operating much less on linear time than we
Hmm.
tend to. Um, when we're fully present is when we're in higher dimensional time.
Hmm.
So whether it's through yoga or meditation or just being present, uh, I use the example of a counseling session. I keep my counseling sessions, I'm organized. I keep it in 60 minutes. Is the way it is, right?
Right.
Um, but when in that session, when I'm facilitating that session, I I lose. I'm not paying attention to time. I'm in the present.
Hmm.
And then something will kind of tap me on the shoulder
Mm.
cognitively, and I'll look at the clock and go, oh, okay, is that so I can keep it within, maybe I'll get something a half hour in, or maybe I'll get something 45 minutes in to keep it on linear time, which
Hmm.
at this point in our development is useful.
Right. Yeah.
Whether that will change, which it probably will,
Hmm.
um, as we go along, we'll need it less and less. We'll just know intuitively. We need a meeting, people show up,
Right.
right? I need to talk with somebody, there we are. That kind of
Yes.
that kind of
Yes.
experience. And it's really, it goes more and more complex. To mention Barbara Ann Clow again, she loves this physicist that wrote a book called The End of Time. And I kind of started it. It was a little too dense for my brain, didn't want to go to the work so hard. But he says there's no time. Time does not exist. It's just a series of spontaneous images or something. I mean, it was, who knows?
Hmm.
And that again, it will change. People are getting more parallel times experiences. Um, when I talk about other lifetimes, I try to remember not to say past or future
Hmm.
because they are still happening. And
Right.
one last thing about that, and then I'll stop, is that when we go through trauma in our lives, like when we've been traumatized as children, and it's unusual in our culture for kids not to have some trauma. Some are real intense and they're in the family, but the culture itself is somewhat traumatizing. So if we go through those traumas, and if we haven't been given a way to work through them and release them, release the emotional energy, the stuck
Mhm.
emotional energy around them, because they get rooted in the right hemisphere of the brain, which is fourth dimensional, it feels like it's still going on because
Mm-hmm.
there's no time.
Right.
And so the healing is actually to bring it into linear time so that emotionally we understand that we no longer have to experience that now. So
Right.
there you go.
Right. That makes a lot of sense in a way that people have probably experienced, getting stuck in a traumatic memory. I think all of us have something, even if it's as simple as something in like third grade where you just embarrassed yourself and you're just like still playing this.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I think too, thinking of time as simultaneous, if it's not really in the past and we're not really in the future, I was thinking about this when I was reading a Dolores Cannon book where it was Jesus in the scenes and this person's like talking to the scene man and he's like asking questions about what she's doing now and I'm like how does that work? Because if he's asking you questions about the future but he's in the past, I think somehow we're interacting with it. And I don't know if we could like go back and like prevent the cataclysm or something, but I think there's some form of healing that comes from bonding with these other aspects of ourselves which exist in different points in time.
In
But
whatever we can call that,
right,
right?
yeah, like they're informing each other, but it's so hard to understand how. But it feels like anytime I connect to another aspect of myself, I actually feel more whole and complete in the moment where some people are like, they'll talk about getting too fragmented. Like if you're in the records, you're learning all. I'm like, I actually feel like I'm more myself when I connect to these other aspects or discover them. And I bring them here. I'm not like trying to go out there. I'm like trying to
Yes.
understand more about me here. And it's actually very grounding for me, even though it wouldn't seem that way.
No,
But
that's really important. And that's what embodiment is. You're bringing it in
mhm,
rather than, and that's where we really have to go through knowing who we are and that self-empowerment, which is
mhm.
really an important foundation.
Right.
Then, when you have the experiences you're talking about, absolutely, it makes us more whole
Hmm.
if we have an us, so to speak.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Well, I've really, really loved this conversation, and I will cherish it for years to come. So I appreciate you making the time. But before we wrap up, could you talk a little bit about some of your other books? Because you've written more than the two we've talked about. How people can find your work, support your work, follow you, connect with you. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Sure. Okay. So I've written 4 books. My first 2 were self-published. And the first one was in the 90s called Journey to Wholeness, A Guide to Inner Healing. And I've just launched it
Mhm.
so that people have more access to it. It's now on Kindle and audiobook as well as paperback. And that's, you'd have to go to Amazon pretty much to get that. Some of these other places are picking up on things, but that's beyond my information. And that book, it was really a lot about working with our inner kids. So it's very much
Mhm.
about emotional healing from a spiritual perspective, um, in terms of soul perspective. Then in early 2000s, I released Empowering the Spirit, which is also the name of my website, which is hard for me to forget, as we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
Um, and that is really, it's more of a workbook. I actually talk about multidimensionality in there, but I didn't understand it. I didn't know about the vertical axis, so it's more past, present, future multidimensionality. But it's very much about allowing our spirit to lead, calming our ego, inviting it for tea, and
Yes.
with lots and lots of meditations and writing exercises and self-inquiry. And I actually have an online course that people can sign up for anytime and work on their own. And I respond to all their work. So they actually have interaction through email with me.
Mhm.
And that also is available on Amazon, again, audio and Kindle. Um, and then my last two books were through Inner Traditions, and buying it from Inner Traditions is always wonderful. They just discounted all their books for the new year, but that's over. They sold them at 35% off, which was a great deal. But they have free shipping on full moons and new moons, and
Oh,
they are the primo consciousness publishers, and they're wonderful. They really walk their talk, and but of course they're all over. A friend sent a photo to me of my book in a bookstore in San Francisco, and I'm on the East Coast, so that was fun to get that.
yes.
Um, but all of the main booksellers and some of the bookstores are you can get it. So
Beautiful. And do you have any like YouTube content or anything like that? Or do you do meditations or?
yeah, my YouTube channel is called Wisdom Within Us.
Okay.
And yes, there are several meditations on there, including meditations from the 60 Ascension Journey, so that when people are reading the book and they're reading the meditation, they actually can get on YouTube and hear it at the same time.
Oh, nice.
So
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And
it has been my pleasure, Astral. It's just lovely to meet you and dialogue with you.
yes, yes, I'm very grateful for you. So thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.